Hi everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Worth the Hype, right? So we have another episode on Kurono, this time on the 60th Jubilee anniversary edition of the Grand Jubilee Calendar, right? So for those who are not aware of, this is Sensei Hajime Asaoka's 60th Jubilee watch, which is his 60th birthday, and therefore he created this, right? So I've lots to talk about. Let's get straight into it. Right. So for this, essentially, it's a limited production. It will not be repeated. And this particular variant, it's very much similar to the Calendra Type 1 in two colors, green and red. However, with several upgrades in place, right? Visually, you can see there are a lot of key changes. The dial is now a textured dial as well, which is a straight line guiloche in the middle. And you have several accents as well in this sub dial, especially in the date. And you have sort of painted markers. I'm not quite sure what's the technicality of that, but it's slightly raised. It's not just flat. You have black hands and you have a black cabochon on the crown as well, right? And behind you do have a stamp of Hajime Asaoka's stamp right behind of the particular case back. Right. The price for this it's on 2,000, almost 2,400 US dollars. Based on Calendar Type 1 secondary market, that would be about $2,000, right? If we're according to that. However, this is a special anniversary watch. It may yield a different results in the secondary market once it's launched. And this is launching on the 17th of October, and we are targeting to release this episode on the 13th of October, right? So you do have some time to think about it before this gets live on sale, right? Let's dive. Oh, wait, sorry. Before that, anything you want to add in, Woody?
So when this one caught me by surprise, when I saw this, first thing I went to go and check because Kurono is a very interesting business model where when they release new versions of a previous watch, they've by and large kept the prices the same. But in this case, they did hike the price up a little bit. And I also suspect it's because they wanted to honor prices globally and the tariff situation doesn't help. So it's unfortunate for us. But we'll go into a bit more detail on the pricing point as well. So just as a benchmark for all of you to be aware of, the Calendria, two versions, that one, the original green one and the red Azuki, they retailed for about 1,700, 1,800 US dollars. So now it's about 2,400 retail, but it includes all the taxes and all that in there already, which is why I feel like it was a necessary measure from their end. No thanks to a very famous person in the US now that all of us have to pay a bit more as well. Because Kurono actually doesn't do this. From past history, even the Reiwa that I'm wearing, cost the same as the original release years and years back. So that's always been the same. But this time around, I don't think they were able to do it. So just something worth noting before we get into it. Back to you, James.
All right, let's just dive straight into it then. Right. So in terms of is it worth it at retail, right? I think Woody raised a point that this yields a little bit more of a premium compared to the Calendar Type 1, both variants. However, I think one could also argue that it's also you're also getting something different as well, comparatively to versus the first iteration of the Type 1, the green to the red. That's practically the same. It's just a different dial color. However, if you compare those two variants versus the Grand Jubilee, it's different because you do have now a textured dial, right? And you do have black hands as well, and you have a black cabochon. You do have something that's a little bit extra. How much are these extras going to worth? I think that's probably going to be the question in this case, right? The argument is going to be made from there, right? And on top of it, this is also going to be there's no numbers being thrown out. There is not going to be a numbered production as well. It's just said there's a limited production. So for all we know, it could be the same amount that is mass produced as well. No clue. Only Kurono knows for that, right? But just looking at this, looking at what you get, all the additions and so on, I personally really, really like it. I think it works towards enhancing the aesthetic of this watch by miles ahead versus the Calendar Type 1, both variants, right? And they have done a lot of things that I've liked in the aesthetic perspective, but I'll save it for the aesthetic category. So in the question, is this worth it at retail, right? With this being a 60th anniversary for Hajime Asaoka, etc., with all the respective added elements of the watch, I personally find that it's going to be worth it, because the sole reason is I have a sense that this is going to be very hard to acquire in the secondary market. If not, you're going to deal with people who really like and support the brand, who is probably likely not going to sell it, or people who is going to try to scalp this, who's going to fetch a very, very high premium in the secondary market as well. So with that being said, if you like it and you really want it, I would say stand by on the 17th and absolutely go for it, because it's going to be hard to acquire in terms of finding somebody to sell it to you or finding the right price. So therefore, I would place it as a 1 over here, right? Over to you, Woody.
So I looked at it as follows, right? If you were looking for a full calendar watch, there are not many in the market. Even micro brands tend to stay away a little bit from this because it adds a complication to the watch that's harder to balance out. And as a result, even if you're thinking of comparisons of calendar watches, there are not many out there. So it makes for a case of whether the asking price is fair or not. I would say there's something to be said about Kurono as a brand. Their watches tend not to depreciate too much, as evidence from the secondary market of the calendar year as well, right? They are still operating 1-2 years on, slightly around the same price as someone who has bought it, paid for delivery and customs charges or whatnot, right? That would have been around the price anyway, so it holds its value pretty well. I don't know whether the price hike really makes it justifiable. I reckon if I was looking at the Calendria's original version, I would say yes. So I'm on 50-50 on this. I gave it half a mark for the retail aspect. It's an interesting conundrum to have. But I completely agree with James. If you like it, it's this sort of time release that Kurono it always practices, right? So as long as you're in that window, you'll get one. That's the time to get it. Back to you, James.
Fair enough. Right. So second, right, is it worth it on the secondary market? So as Woody mentioned as well, the price tends to be quite, I would say, stable-ish. Even with the models that is very much highly produced, it's the amount of losses that you're going to take is not going to be a lot, right? The challenge is probably going to be is finding the right buyer that will really want to buy from you. So my prediction for this, because this, as mentioned, this watch hasn't launched yet, and we're all solely basing off on prediction at this point and assumptions. My sense is that this watch will, at least for the first 6 months to 12 months, it's going to yield a high amount of premium, right? Whether somebody's going to buy it or not, that's besides the point. The listings is going to be high, right, at the very start of it. So the play for this, or at least my recommendation for it, is that you either buy it right now if you want it fast, or you think long term when people are bored of it, or when people look past the hype of this particular piece, where you're going to probably be looking at 2 to 3 years time, right? Maybe you'll probably get somewhere closest to RRP, or maybe even lower. That's something we need to wait and see. But at least for short term wise, if you're banking on going to get a deal immediately after launch in the secondary market, I would say your chances is going to be really, really slim, right? So I could be wrong. Like I mentioned, this is very much purely speculative. Therefore, I would say very much look at the price and monitor it very closely. Therefore, I give it a 0.5 over here for me, right? It's going to be very much highly dependent on several key factors in order for it to make it work on the secondary market. Over to you, Woody.
So I'll take a lead from James's previous episode as well when it comes to the secondary market here. What you need to be aware of is Kurono is very much an enthusiast darling, which means to say most people looking at this watch fall into the enthusiast camp. And so on the secondary market, you're going to find pretty good condition ones. Even if you take a look at the Calendria models right now, right, all the conditions are pretty good. You know, whatever listing that's there for 2-3 year watch. So James, I'm completely agreeable with James. You either get it now at retail if you think the price is fair, or you take the gamble and just wait a few years and you're going to get a pretty solid unit in 2 to 3 years' time. I don't know whether this is going to be a speculative piece. I generally don't speculate on these things. I think the market's pretty soft already. So probably I don't expect it to climb up very much more. One thing that's nice for Kurono owners is there will always be an enthusiast appeal to this. And it's a luck of the draw. It almost always feels like if it's done well, it does generally quite okay in the secondary market as well. And I think that will be the nice segue to our next category anyway. Back to you, James. So half a point from
Great. All right. So on aesthetics, right? This is where we're probably going to spend the most time talking about this watch, because for those who missed the previous Kurono episode, Kurono, you understand that Kurono is a brand that you're buying it purely for Hajime Asaoka's design element, right? And essentially that's the whole like motto of this brand, right? It's very much an accessible brand that is using affordable Miyota movements in the watch to show what the Japanese watch is being made of in terms of design language, right? Through the eyes of Hajime Asaoka. Right. And I think this watch, this new release, the Grand Jubilee Calendar, totally fits that particular motto, right? I'm not sure if we have seen any Kurono watch with a guiloche. Oh, it's probably the first, right? At least to my knowledge. Despite it just being a straight line guiloche, right? There is a marketing term in there that says that it's straight line because we want to show that the simple and clean design of Japanese. So I think that's a little bit too far-fetched, but just let's take the marketing story out of it. The looks of it, it works. I think it's clean. It has the right amount of texture into it. Them going back into the kanji logo, that's a great plus, right? I mentioned how much I hated the cursive English logo in the previous episode. Them going back to this as well, it works. And somehow that painted logo in that guiloche, that how it curves and everything, somehow it works for me. I absolutely love it. And the dial color matching with the black hands as well, with the black cabochon on the crown as well. I think that's a very good contrast and it totally works. I like how the indices are as well. It's I don't know if it's painted or hand painted or what, I'm not sure, but it's not flat, right? It's there's a little bit of raise to it. It's a very mild 3D effect, but nonetheless it's not flat. If you look at the calandria, that's pure flat, right? Adding all together with the new cutout from the date window as well. You have the regular rectangle cutout and the additional circular cutout on the date window. All this works. The only thing that I would say doesn't really add anything for me is the kanji stamp on the back of the case back. I think that doesn't add anything for me. If anything, it adds discomfort for me, right? Because you're adding thickness and you have bulk of the weight of the watch stamping on your wrist, or maybe that's the design feature, right? Because when you remove the watch, you would have Hajime Asaoka's stamp etched into your skin for a couple of hours. Maybe I'm not sure, but yeah, that doesn't really add anything for me. I couldn't care about that. But aside from that, all the elements I've mentioned, the black hands and the right color and the right cutout with the guiloche back into the kanji logo, it all works wonders for me, right? I would say that's the right design choice, and I absolutely love it. So I have no faults over there. That's a full one for me over here. And over to you, Woody.
Well, that's almost a full few minutes of a fanboyism right there, James. But anyway, let me just put it this way though. I did not like the Calandria one. Neither did I like the Azuki. I felt they looked, no offense to all those who own it, I just never liked it. There was something very jarring about that whole combination, be it the bezel, be it the typography. They just didn't speak to me. It's a biased thing on my end. I never got it. In fact, when it went to be nominated as one of the candidates in GPHG, I was like, really? Was that a very soft year or something that this got all the attention? Now, when this one showed up, though, this feels more cohesive. The entire design works better. I like how the typography now looks. I like how the balancing now works. The nice touch of the different texture in the middle, to the side. I also appreciate, and again, shout out to that whoever's doing the copywriting for Kurono. Whatever you take before you write, right? I think I want some of that because it's like so blown out of proportion, but I see what you're trying to say. So the other thing that they said, aside from the straight line stuff, right, was the fact that there was always this problem with Kurono's date windows. And I completely agree that when you put a date window with some sort of raised element, it is even more jarring. It's almost like light casts a full shadow on it. I think we talked about it in the previous Kurono episode as well. So for them to decide to cut out a bit more so that it slopes further downwards and creates less of a spatial effect, I think that works really well for the watch as well. So from a design perspective, way more cohesive. I like it, but I don't love it either, only because, and this is a bias I also have, right? For those of you who've known me for a while, I'm a huge chronograph fan. And this gives me a chronograph kind of vibe, right? Because it's 2 subdials. And all things considered, it's a very well executed 2 subdial design. But my challenge is this. It's cohesive, but at the same time, it's there's not something very wow about it already as a result of it being a single color. I'll point out a specific example, right? If you think about a lot of calendar watches, there's something that makes it work quite well sometimes, is when they add, for example, the moon phase feature, because it adds a bit of design, something to break the monotony. Now, the problem that I have with this watch is I might be sounding a bit too harsh. I actually like it way better than the Azuki and the Calendar one. So that aside. So if this was the Calendar one, I'll give it a 0. But this one here, I'm giving it half a mark, right? But my view is just this. It's one of those watches that from a quick glance, it will look a little bit blasé, right? A little bit bland. And you need to look at it closer to appreciate it. And that's something that will speak to some of you out there. It just happens not to speak to me as much. I was on the fence on whether to give it a full mark or not, because honestly, I like this way better than the previous versions. I like the fact that they went to a more classic bezel as well. It works really well for the watch. If there was a world where we design our scoring system to give 3/4 a score for it, I would have given that. But I don't like it enough to go all the way out there and recommend it. And I actually like that joke that you made, James, about the whole stamping on the wrist, right? As someone who has experience with Grand Seiko, some of these engravings at the back, especially if you wear your watch really tight, you are really stamping something onto your hand. And I tend to wear my watches a bit tighter anyway. It's quite hilarious that for a Jubilee edition, you're going to have Hajime's stamp on your wrist for a bit. As so spot on. So if you're a big fan of the brand, this is really a shout out to you. You now have a temporary tattoo that you can have with it as well. It's a nice design touch though. I think if it wasn't so protruding, I would like it a bit more. But now that it's almost like a rubber stamping on a metal stamp on your wrist, right? That's where the minus will come in a little bit as well. But otherwise, I think it's well done. Just doesn't speak to me, so I'm a bit harsh on that. But otherwise, much better than the previous 2 calendar versions. It's not easy to pull this off, so kudos to that. Back to you, James.
Fair enough. But one thing I'd like to point out as well, right, as you mentioned, is something that you need to look closer. So I'll have to say, I have to be honest. On my first impression, when I look at it, I was like, okay, not bad, but what's special about this? That's my very first impression when I first got the email, when I looked into it. However, when I went in closer and look at the zoom in, the macro images and so on, it's like, oh wait, it's black hands. And then it's like, wait, there's a black cabochon. And it's like, whoa, okay. If all these things that's like really very minute details that really makes it work and so on. So is it a watch that will wow somebody immediately? Probably no. But is it a watch that will allow you to appreciate the intricate details of it? Probably yes, but and I think eventually it comes down to preference whether that's something you value or not. Yeah.
Agreed.
But yeah, overall, let's move on to the next criteria, which is the horological feature, right? So over here, nothing really to shout about. I think that goes with every single Kurono watch. I think they're usually using the Miyota movement. So what you see is what you get. You buy, you put it in. The bulk of the value of the brand goes into that design, right? That special aesthetic that you get, the design language, and so on, the entire package. So yeah, over here, it is a Miyota movement. Nothing wrong with it. The thickness of the watch and everything, it works at 38 millimeter as well. So no fault to the movement at all, but there's really nothing that's really done extra aside from choosing and buying the right movement, right? So overall, it's 0 for me over here. And over to you, Woody.
Simple one here. It's a off-the-shelf movement, affordable movement as well. One actually, I don't have experience with the Calandria, but I wonder whether it has the same noisy rotor that most Miyotas have. Maybe that's one of the things that comes with the cheaper movement. Nothing to shout about, but you're really buying into design with Kurono. So if the Kurono design works for you, that's where the value will be found. So no marks here given, but it's not a markdown. It's just the way that we run this series.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think this is a very interesting thing that you mentioned, though, in terms of the noisy rotor. So being owned a total of 4 Kurono, and all of them are automatic. Yes, all of them are automatic, right? Actually, I've never noticed a noisy rotor problem comparatively to other Miyota movement. So no idea what Kurono did. Some extra grease or some Japanese grease that was being used or something. But yeah, no issue on that. So at least historically wise, and I own I had the Type 1, the Calendar Type 1 before. I've since sold it. I've never had an issue with the noisy rotor before as well. So yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Yeah.
Then I stand corrected.
Fair enough, right? All right. On the particular last criteria, which is on the wearability, right? So as I mentioned, this is a 38 millimeter watch with a annual calendar complication that has a pusher on the one. I can't remember where is it, but you have a pusher and you have a pin with it as well. You need that to adjust the days and the month that you need to press it, which is a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. With that being said, with a complications in there and the 38 movement with a relatively thin watch, it's very, very, very wearable, right? Honestly, if you compare in terms of the changes between the regular time only watches and the the calendar watches, in this case the Grand Jubilee Calendar, there's not much difference, right? To the naked eye, you can barely able to tell it as well, right? Which actually makes me question, why can't the time only watch be thinner? Right, that's actually my question, right? But overall, no flaws in the wearability side of things. You would absolutely be able to wear it. In terms of lug to lug and in terms of thickness as well. I would personally swap out the leather bracelet if I were to get this watch, and that's what I did for all of my Kurono. But aside from that, no faults to it. A full one over here for me. Yeah.
For
Over
me,
to you.
wearability is one of the strengths of Kurono. Proportions have been spot on ever since the very first one. I think the only ones which has wearability issues is really the chronograph. All its other watches, especially the time only and the calendar series, is a very similar, as James pointed out, it's almost the same case that they use, right? And it wears really well. So even as a tiny wrist stripe person like myself, there's no issue. Like I'm wearing the Reiwa right now, there's no issue with it. As long as, even if you have a big wrist and you don't mind smaller watches, which seems to be now the trend now going forward, or at least for the period of time, there's really no issue with a proportionality, wearability aspect. So it's a full mark for me there as well when it comes to wearability. I think it's more a case about whether you prefer smaller or bigger watches. But for folks like myself, this works absolutely like a gem. Back to you, James.
Mm. Perfect. All right. So to sum it up in terms of our scoring, that brings it into a 3.5 for myself and a 2.5 for Woody. Right. So that brings it to a 6, which means buy it if the price is right for you. Right. Overall, like I mentioned as well, with buyers involved, Woody and I'm not sure if Woody still is, but I used to be a Kurono contributor and own up to 4 Kurono at one point. And Woody has one Kurono himself too, and we're a big fan of the brand. Um, Perhaps there is a lot of scores that's being given well because in comparison to the previous releases and comparison to the previous calendar, I think that influenced a lot. But nonetheless, I am absolutely happy or slash glad that they went back to sort of this design language. And if they continue on this path, I'm looking forward to future watches that they're releasing. Right. Um, I really just can't stand the cursive English logo. I think that absolutely needs to go. Kanji is the way. Stick with what you have, lean in hard in terms of that Japanese element and that design language. And I think that's something people want, right? Added new fun stuff, textured down and so on, aside from just regular color change. That keeps people exciting, right? Instead of just having a time only watch that you have 8, 10, 12 different variations, but just different colors, right? But yeah, what are your final thoughts, Woody?
Well, I would say this. If the calendar, you've been on the fence for it, this is the one I think that's the absolute winner amongst the other the other two that have come up, right? I like this the most. So it's really about a case of whether this speaks to you or not. I'm on the edge of loving it. I just don't from an initial perspective. Maybe I'll need to spend a bit more time with it. But for me, if you've been on the fence on the calendar because something doesn't speak to you, I think this one is the likeliest to speak to you. So have a close look at it. You have a time window to decide, and if you do decide to get one, hopefully wear it in great health.
Fair enough. I think that's a great way to end it. Until then, we'll see you in the next episode. As mentioned as well, we are listening to your comments or slash DMs as well. If you have any comments, drop it in. Any critiques, drop it in as well. Or any requests of watches that you'd like us to cover. We are committed to driving this once a week for the time being. If there is more and more requests, we may bring it up to twice a week. But ultimately, Woody and I both have a full-time job on top of this. This is a passion project from us for our love of watches or slash horology. But yes, we truly appreciate what has been shown in terms of the feedback and in terms of the views that are coming in as well, right? So we take that as more of you guys are liking it in terms of the improvement we're making, and we'll continue to do so as well as long as you guys are watching it, right? But until then, we'll see you into the next episode. Bye.